everybody. This is Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast, episode 36. It's Sunday afternoon, December 6th, the day of my daughter Alice's birthday. We went up to Idlewild. Idlewild is a very short distance from where I live in Fallbrook, San Diego. So I live in the northern tip of San Diego. And it's if you get outside of ideas and politics and blah, 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 and you just have a sense of where you are, I just feel so fortunate to live in a place where I can drive an hour and a half and be up in the mountain in pine trees, looking at some crag up there. So we went up and we got a little lodge with a little fireplace, and we had a very nice time. And took Alice. So Alice just turned 4 today. We had her birthday on Friday and Saturday. So, my daughters are 7 and 4, and taking a 7 and a 4-year-old hiking, and everything is new for them. It's the first time they've been to all these places, and seeing some black-tailed deer and getting fairly close to those deer and watching their behavior and teaching my daughters how to sit there and breathe and just allow those deer to be. And we just had a really, really wonderful time. It's beyond words, I think, for me, just what the experience of being a dad has been like. The amount of transformation it has prompted, the amount of adaptation, the amount of humility, the amount of gratitude, the amount of anguish at times, grief. But being a dad for me, particularly being a dad going through a prolonged separation process, what I'm trying to think of is more of a transformation than a divorce. Divorce has so much attached to it, but certainly through this process I have been through, particularly a couple years ago, but the lessons have compounded through that time, but particularly the pain, the initial pain of recognizing what is about to take place and the true weight of the change, the true weight of the shift that is coming. It's like seeing something on the horizon that you're preparing for and is coming, but not wanting to go there, but there's an inevitability to it. And watching your children experience that, watching them try to make sense of what's taking place without a proper frame of reference, without validation for their point of view. In some ways, just watching them go through a similar experience as what I am going through, just in a completely different way. Can you hear the ice cream truck? Sunday afternoon, we got the ice cream truck coming through the neighborhood. But there's so many directions to go with that history and that story. And I think for me, I talk a lot about the stories we tell and about how the way we tell our story certainly influences the way we experience this present moment. And I think it's worth looking at stories. I think it's worth looking at how we tell the story and how we formulate that tale and what that story is based upon. What's interesting is, I hope that truck sound is not resonating too much through the audio, but I'm sure we're all good. What's interesting to me is you think about this process of, let's just use the word enlightenment because it's something a lot of people might understand, or at least have a sense of, enlightenment as letting go, as being, as. And interestingly, when you look at the figures throughout history, or even contemporary figures that we look to as a voice, as someone who has a voice we want to listen to, that we're motivated by or inspired by. And different people have different idols, different people have different mentors, different people have different teachers. But when I look at all the teachers that I consider my mentors, that I consider my fathers, my brothers, my teacher. There's so much to look into there. There's so much there to just in this moment, could reach out and touch these different topics on that, and how we become, and the stories we tell, and the way we formulate those stories, and what they're based upon, and looking at sort of the mythology of the stories we tell, and how we derive meaning from experience. And what I notice is, I say this a lot to friends of mine, just kind of being funny and humorous and self-deprecating, and just, none of these great teachers had children, so far as I know. And I've looked for it, and I'm sure there's something. If anyone out there knows of anything, please let me know. But I've looked for great teaching from someone who had children. And of course, they're out there. Of course it's there. But certainly the figures that rise to the surface that we tend to look toward as a great spiritual teacher, or a great teacher in that way, as far as I can tell, they almost universally don't have children. And being a father, being a dad, being graced with the opportunity to hold that space with a child has been just utterly humbling. And they are my greatest teachers. It's so fascinating to me that of all the teachers and all the books, they are my greatest teachers. And progressively seeing the world through their eyes, and sensing them and feeling them and observing them and navigating, when do I intervene? When do I stand back? When do I stand back and observe my child in a state of suffering? And when do I decide to intervene, and will intervening help them or hurt them? Certainly rescuing and coddling is another form of harm, potentially. We could discuss that, but, overwhelming children with coddling, overwhelming children with validation, overwhelming children with good feelings, trying to avoid any negative feelings, trying to avoid any struggle, any suffering, certainly is not going to bode well for a strong child or a strong person, a strong adult. Something about the experience of working through something about the experience of becoming something is incredibly important for our emotional, just for our development. We could break it down into terms, but for our development. And certainly everyone suffers. Certainly everyone has their version of suffering based upon the story they're telling in the context of the mythology that has been wrapped around them by society and their family and whoever happens to be close to them, you know, in the symbology they and the stories they're told. So knowing when to step in and protect and when to allow is this ongoing dialogue. It's this ongoing dance. It's this ongoing experience, you know. When do you stand and fight and when do you observe? You know, certainly, and this is, you know, just as an aside, doing this podcast has been interesting because I decided that I wanted to simply have conversations with people in a more expansive way. And I thought, this is such a beautiful medium to be able to connect. And what a great gift it is to be able to do this. So part of that, though, was coming to terms with myself and ongoing as a process of an ongoing practice I've been going through for quite a while. Well, perhaps lifetime, but very deliberately these past 2 years by being put in this position of submission and having to turn that into surrender or else all the nasty stuff that happens when you resist surrender, when you live in denial and resist surrender. Quite simply, when you warp everything about your immediate world around you to keep yourself safe because you have been injured and you resist that surrender, it's a sort of hell on earth, I think. I think it's a sort of torture. So going through a couple of years of popping my head up and thinking everything's okay, and then whoop, not quite yet, Mark, time to surrender again. Time to put your face in the ground again. Time to get low again. Time to breathe again. Time to let go again. Over and over and over and over and over again. Profound experience of surrender. Profound experience of submission. Perceiving submission. Being told I can't do something by my life. Being put in a position, forced into a position that doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel right. It's being imposed. And we all have our versions of this. Every single person, of course. Universal change, chaos is a given, and we try to force temporary stability. In reality, all the temporary stability is an illusion. We hold on to something for a while, and it gives us a sense of that's the thing, that's the reality, that's me. That's what I'm about. But submission will happen because things will change, whether you like it or not. And transitioning from submission to surrender and learning to flow, learning to radically accept as quickly as possible, learning to even feel the energy of that resistance, or learning to feel where you're about to hold on to something or fight for an attachment or fight for a story, seeing that and feeling it and being able to recognize from those really painful experiences you've been through. That's what a lot of people are calling like PTSD growth, which is just growing through your pain, growing through your suffering, growing through your trauma. And being able to say, okay, I feel that resistance. I feel that story. I feel that nudge. I feel that trigger. I feel the pulse in my body that wants to rage and wants to get angry and wants to correct this situation. But what happens when no amount of anger, no amount of rage, no amount of sadness, no amount of falling apart forces your reality to stay the way you want it to stay? You better learn to let go. You better learn to flow. You better learn to be honest with yourself. So a practice I've been doing for a while is deliberately asking myself if I'm being honest. Am I being honest in this moment? If I look into something, am I really being honest about it, or am I telling myself a bullshit story so I can hold on to some temporary reality, or some temporary illusion of control, or some temporary illusion that I'm in charge of something? What's interesting, and this is just where I'm at, what's interesting is the more I have let go of my own story, my own attachments, my own thing that I'm fighting for, or the thing that I thought I was, the more I'm left with this experience of being a father to two little girls. And that's a whole different type of learning. It's a whole different type of lesson. Because certainly if you're single, if you're not in that position, single is not the right word, maybe. It's if you're not a parent, let's just say. It's profoundly easier to let go and move on. It's profoundly easier to let go of attachment, to just, let's leave it at that, to let go. So being a father has challenged me in ways that I'm still navigating and still contemplating and still working on. You know, to what degree do I intervene? To what degree do I stand firm? To what degree do I create the illusion of solidity? You know, to what degree do I create for my children this sense of stability? Now, I know just from child developmental psychology and just from working with a lot of children and a lot of families, and, you know, seeing how the human story unfolds through generational trauma, I know that providing a sense of stability and predictability and security and compassion for children is profoundly important for their sense of well-being. And you see how we get into the semantics of this very quickly. Because that stability, that security is very important for, you know, to create, let's say, to provide the potential. Think of it as a garden. To create the potential for that flower to become fully what it is, to become fully what it's destined to be. So you create the right conditions, you nurture the right conditions. It's just the right amount of something and not enough of something. It's finding this balance of light and water and tending but not tending, and allowing that flower to become fully what it is already meant to be. And finding that balance is this ongoing dialogue. It's this ongoing journey. It's this ongoing experience. You know, it's this ongoing lesson. It's just where I'm at. And there are times when I know I hold on too much, particularly. So, you know, you think of this experience of divorce. In some ways, I have to say goodbye to my purpose every week. And man, did I fight for that. Man, did I fight to be present all the time. Man, was that, you know, letting go of marriage is one type of grief. Letting go of time with your children that you thought you were going to have is a whole other animal. And it's one that I'm continuing to navigate. Particularly the first couple months when they left every week, it was the deepest grief I've ever felt in my life every Sunday and Monday. And I went through a lot of deep, I keep using the word deep, but how do you express something that's happening in the body energetically and emotionally, and that's, a release of attachment. But through that process of surrender, went through a lot of pain. And there were a lot of a lot of major lessons that came out of that. Recognizing as long as my children are happy and taken care of and they're doing well, why wouldn't I want that for them, even if I'm not physically present? That was something I had to wrestle with. Allowing my children, or having to allow my children, having to surrender to my children, being around another man. Being around a man I don't have a relationship with. And you can see where that story goes. Having to accept that. What a great painful gift. One that I'm still working on. So I say goodbye to my purpose every week. And there's been a lot of lessons in that. And part of it is recognizing that part of that role of being the father, and it makes me think about God the Father, the experience of God the Father, the learning of God the Father, and maybe I'll get into that, but just being a father and recognizing my job is not always to be physically present. In fact, a lot of times it's not to be present. As far as I can see it, my job is to provide them with the experience that I am a sort of tree. This is what came to me a while back. The experience that I'm a tree. I'm a tree down by the water. When I grew up on Deer Lake in Minnesota, there was this beautiful willow tree overhanging the water, and that tree provided, without any recognition or any real gratitude, looking back, that tree provided a whole canopy, a whole experience in that space. And when I needed that tree, when I needed that space, I went to it. There were so many things in my childhood that I sought out in the proximity of that tree and the water beneath it. So much solace I experienced in the water beneath that tree. Go figure that a whole bunch of my art was inspired by water. I've always sought out water as a form of solace or healing. So for me, being clear with my children that I am there and that I will be there as long as I'm breathing, maybe even if I'm not, and they can come to me and they can rest under the shade and they can recuperate, they can let their belly out, and they can allow themselves to just be who they are, and that their voice matters and their emotions matter, and if they're feeling something, they're allowed to feel it, even if it's anger, even if it's sadness, even if it's grief, even if it's fear, even if it's joy, they're allowed to feel it. But when they decide to walk away from that place where I'm rooted, or when someone takes them away from that place, even if I don't want that someone to take them away from that place, in some ways, like a rooted tree, there's only so much I can provide. There's a lot I have to accept. Once they walk away from the shade that I provide, or the security or safety that I provide, they are, they're in some other space, some other type of space. But hopefully, whatever was provided in the sanctuary of that space, they carry with them in their heart. They carry with them in their gut. They carry with them in their mind and in their wisdom. And it helps to guide them in some ways. It helps to provide a sort of direction. So that's something that I wrestle with every day, and I think wrestling might be a good way to look at it. I grapple with. And I don't know. It's just the most compelling and beautiful experience of my life. And I consider them such a gift, and I consider the experience such a gift. And I think there's so much learning to be had there. And as an extension, this is something I think I have been hesitant to talk about, or hesitant to just naturally let flow out of my mouth, even though it's right there on the tip of my tongue, is just talking more expansively about God, or talking more expansively about that space, or expressing honestly in that space. Because too often, I think we do the opposite of what we could do. Rather than saying, hey, the divine is within you, you are a part of all things, however you want to characterize that with your own language or mythology is fine. But you are a part of and I think we were told a long time ago that only certain types of people can talk about that. You got to be a shaman or a priest or a leader of some sort in order to take on that role. Rather than just, no, it's cool to just speak openly and honestly about that relationship or that space, or just to communicate honestly about our experience in that space and what that experience is like. Because I think we all contemplate it. Even my closest friends that would use the word atheist, they still contemplate it. They still observe it. They still recognize that beyond the space of our own knowing, which is relatively limited, there sure is a lot of unknown out there. There sure is a lot of expansion out there. There sure is a lot to play with. So I think it's something we all don't quite know how to dive into and don't quite know how to talk about and certainly we're afraid of being honest, because we have been told if we're honest about it, if we don't just follow the rules as they're told to us, we're bad or wrong or sinful in some ways. Instead of, no, your children need to ask questions. Children need to ask questions. And they need to be curious, and they need to act out their fears, and they need to act out their thoughts, and they need to act out their sadness and their grief and their love and their joy. And this life is an experience where we're all children. We're all learning by the experience. So we're told not to question and to obey. And I think that's something that is the opposite of what the true teaching is. So I'm just curious about this. And for me, I work with a lot of combat veterans, and I work with a lot of people who have been through a lot of stuff most people don't want to go through, because I realize it's all relative. But there's everyday bad shit, and then there's just grotesquely bad shit. And people don't want to go through that grotesquely bad shit. But there's a lot of people that do, a lot more people that do than we know. They're all out there in our families, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, quietly suffering, desperately hoping someone will look at them and listen to them and pay attention to them. But working with people like this puts you really close to the heart of what most people are afraid of. And it helps you realize why people question God and why people question the existence of God. And I've known a lot of combat veterans that either let go of religion or found religion through war. I know a lot of them that decided God couldn't be real, or God couldn't care, because how could that kind of suffering take place? How can you watch a child be cut in half by a 50 cal and not question, where is God? And for me, I think how I have arrived at the place that I'm presently navigating, and I'm still navigating and still learning, and I'm still just a child learning, is that God is there. The tree is there. The everlasting tree is there for you to rest under, for you to find sanctuary in, for you to find sustenance in. And the language you use to define that, or the mythology, the stories that you use to define that, is part of your journey. It's part of your experience, but that transcends your language. You know, people get offended when you use a word other than God, even though God is a 3-letter word in the English language. That's an approximation of something much grander, profoundly beyond words. And there's a word for God in every language. So part of what I've looked at in that story is, what does it take as individuals and as communities and as cultures and as nations to drift so far away from that tree, to drift so far away from that sanctuary, to drift so far away from that place that we're capable of a level of denial that would allow the death of children, that would allow the mass extinction of human beings or animals or land, or forests. What kind of denial does it take? What kind of removal from the wisdom of the Father, or the wisdom of the Mother, or the wisdom of the great before we lose touch with each other, before we lose touch with the forests that we're cutting down, before we lose touch with the children that are just the fallout of war, the collateral damage of war. How far do we get away before we can murder our brothers and sisters? Or before we, as a collective of people, will surrender our power, will surrender our voices to such a degree that we will empower a small but powerful group of entities to dominate the planet, to dominate other people. We watch people die on our televisions daily. We deny it daily. We make sense of it daily. We rationalize it daily. We rationalize children in cages at the border. I can't tell you how many times I've heard good Christian people rationalize children in cages at the border. You're not selling me on your perspective, on your faith. So rather than blaming God, why not take a good look in the mirror? Take a good look in the mirror. How honest are you being with yourself? How honest are we being with ourselves? Do we like what we've created? Is what we've created working for us? Is what we've created working? You know, right now, if you were to look at what I'm doing right now, you see the sunlight coming through the door and the leaves shimmering on the desktop, and I'm in this very peaceful moment. But in the bigger picture, I'm in the context of this giant story that's being told. And we're all under quarantine, and a vaccine's coming, and changes are coming, and people are fighting over power, and there's this big story playing out. But in this moment, how honest are you being with yourself? How far have you drifted from the sanctuary of that place of connectedness? I think the most profound manipulation, the most profound thing that's being done to us all that we allow, you know, I hear everyone arguing about their ideas and their beliefs and whatever story is about to take place and whatever side is correct. The greatest manipulation is separating us. The greatest manipulation is making us believe that we're different than each other, that some are better than others, that one tribe is better than another, that one belief system or mythology is better than another, that we are separate rather than that we are all interconnected. Those trees we cut down are actually completely an extension of us and vice versa. Those children on the other side of the world that you watch die on the television are your sons and daughters. Those young men and women on both sides of whatever war are your brothers and sisters. What would it be like to come home? What would it be like to tap into that sanctuary, to tap into that place, to let go of this story and to just notice that quiet place within yourself that transcends you, that transcends your attachment, that transcends the story you're telling, that place that universally connects to all things and all beings. And to maybe consider that that place is the divine of you and in you, and that you are a part of that universal resonance, that universal breath, that universal voice. And it's not that God abandoned us, it's that we ran away from God. We rebelled against that place. We decided we didn't need that sanctuary. We decided to go away from it. Rather than recognizing it's right there, right here, right now to plug into, you can become love. In the Christian story, mankind rebelled against God in the Old Testament. Christ came in the New Testament and was the way back to the Father. Christ within. What is Christ within to you? Allowing Christ to become you, allowing love to become you, becoming love, being in love, rather than waiting around for love to come at you and being rescued by love, like I've done many times in my life, waiting for someone to love you enough to make you feel that you're valuable or worthy, rather than recognizing it's in you. You can plug into it, you can tap into it, you can become that place. It is you, it's your divine inheritance. And I truly don't care what language you use to define that, or whether you want to talk about it through a metaphysical or an epistemological framework, and forgive the philosophical words, but just, however you choose to tell that story. It's there. And every one of us are living a lesson right now. Every one of us have teachers in our life right now. Every one of us have things to nurture and things to tend to, and trying to decide to what degree do we intervene and to what degree do we stand back and watch and let that flower grow and struggle. Just providing the right conditions for it. And I hope by being honest and just sharing this journey that I'm on, it will resonate with you somehow. I love getting to check in with you all this way. I love getting to just share whatever's on my mind in this particular moment. I'm going to go out and paint now for a while and see what comes out. Put my feet on the ground, play with my dog. Be grateful for the breath in my lungs, and be grateful for this time and place, and recognize that there's a lot of choice in the story I get to tell myself today. And I'm going to go work on that and practice on that. I'm even going to try to have fun. I'm even going to try to laugh a little bit. And I'm going to put some music on, and I'm going to move my body, and I'm going to, any place that's negative in my body, I'm going to shake it out, and I'm going to move it out, and I'm going to release it. And I'm going to laugh, and I'm going to have a good time. So much love to you, my friends. This is Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast, episode 36. Have a most beautiful Sunday.